Hello and welcome. Welcome again. This little video is about the channel. I thought that I would record it live because it gives it an element of authenticity. I tried it a couple of minutes ago, but there was a technical glitch, shall we say. So that was quite authentic as well. Anyway, hello. If you're listening to this video, you may be interested in what the channel is about. So let me help explain what it is about. Recently, I changed the description, and it's not radically different from what it was before, but writing it out got me thinking that it's useful to someone who's considering subscribing or wants to watch some of the videos and hopefully enjoy some of the videos to understand roughly the range of topics and also the rationale behind having a bit of a range of topics. People talk about a niche on YouTube and in fact in other areas in terms of, let's say, interaction online. And I think that that is important. So for example, you won't get me taking apart old cameras, which I find interesting, but that's not what I do, and I've no real expertise in that area. So let me help guide myself, and therefore I hope you, through what the channel is by reading from the description. It says, on this channel, we will explore a myriad of ideas. And if you're relatively high in openness or very high in openness, you'll enjoy that. You may well find that to be quite a stimulating idea that, oh, we can look at a few things. In my opinion, when we learn one thing, it can very often help us understand another thing, another area, another subject, another topic in sometimes a slightly deeper way, an enhanced way. That's not always the case, but what may seem to be disparate subjects and ideas, I have found are often linked. And even if they're not, it can be interesting just to contrast the difference between looking at, let's say, some of the stuff that I've covered here, a politician and how they behave and what they're doing, and also our ability or not to overcome obstacles. They're not necessarily related, but sometimes there's more of a connection than we realize. So anyway, a myriad of ideas, including, oh gosh, I've actually written it out there, should have followed the script, why we think and behave in certain ways. That's a big one for me. I've always been intrigued about success, failure, the inability for me to do things, the ability for me to do things, what happens in terms of the internal dialogue, what doesn't happen, how some people seem to excel, what gets in the way from us. Succeeding can sound a little bit goal-driven, so that is part of it. So what stops us succeeding? But in that mix for me is what stops us being happy at times, what gets to us, what can be debilitating psychologically. So I'm interested in that stuff. Why do we think the way we think, and therefore why do we behave the way that we behave? And that's an ongoing process. There's more and more information and knowledge coming out every day, but it's also important, I believe, to remember that we're all unique. And then I talk there about toxic versus nourishing cultures and societies. And that's very important. And these days, I think it's really important, perhaps more important than it's ever been, to recognize that we may have access to certain toxicities that, of course, can be online. They're not necessarily as they would have been in the not too distant past, something that we would probably have had to in person engage with. So we've got to be careful about that. We've got to recognize what has the potential to harm us and what is beneficial. And then I talk about leaders and self-leadership. So in the midst of those myriad of ideas, and I'm only covering a few here, by the way, or a few areas, the idea of leadership and self-leadership, I've already talked a fair amount about, and I will talk about it again. Self-leadership is us. It's how do we pull together the ideas, the tips, the strategies, the knowledge that can allow us to be, let's take that example from before, more resilient, to protect our psychological well-being, to overcome those obstacles, to keep on going, but also perhaps to be a little bit more, well, upbeat, happier. And in that mix, I think it's important to recognize that when we then look at other leaders, positional leadership, that could be you as well. So it could be self-leadership, and also you are leading, you're heading up something, you're inspiring people. And that, as often as not, we think of as being in an organization, but it need not be. It could be, and I work with people in organizations, but you may just be leading by what you're doing. And so leadership of self, for me, is, to use an old phrase, the inner game. Leading others is the outer game. But that could be you on your own, but of course it could be in a position where other people are impacted. And the idea there is that we influence people by what we do anyway. So we can choose to be toxic, we can choose to be positive, we can choose to ignore and be cynical, or we can choose to help and be empathic and support. And for me, that's all part of self-leadership, and also therefore potentially positional leadership. Again, not necessarily somewhere on the organizational chart, but somewhere in the interaction that we have with other people. Could be in the family, could be in the community, of course. And as I say, could be in a business, small or large. Then I talk about all this through accessing research. I've done a bit of research over the years. I've got some knowledge in some areas and not a lot of knowledge in other areas. But I think it's important to base things as far as we can, in part where possible, on the research that's been done, and to look at it through sometimes a lens of, okay, let's get a second and third opinion on that. Because we shouldn't look at just one bit of research. You know, the headlines in the papers that will say, if you do this one thing, you'll live to be 150. And you think, well, is that true, even remotely? And if it is, what's it based on? So I think it's important to look at research, and also, as I say, to be critical of that research. Not nasty, just, all right, let me understand how valid it was. What was the sample size? Who conducted it? Were there any competing factors in there? Who sponsored it? That's a good one to ask. And then I also talk about sharing experiences. That could be you sharing, it could be me sharing, and it will hopefully be more people in the not too distant future who come on to chat to me that you can listen into and watch and ask questions of. And then I've said it there, being in conversation with those who are expert and knowledgeable in their own areas. That doesn't mean to say that I will only talk to experts. It's not what I mean, because normally people consider an expert or someone who's knowledgeable as potentially someone who's done the research. But what I'm really talking about here is what I said earlier on. I want to talk to people who share the experience. The overlap with someone sharing could be that they have specifically done research in that area, or they are a designated expert, but it could also be that the expertise and the knowledge is because of their experience. Experience is extraordinarily powerful and can often open up so many different facets and aspects of a particular subject topic that we wouldn't necessarily get from research alone. We can, but not necessarily. So I guess I'm saying a combination of both the designated expert and or the individual who has the experience, because those people are often fascinating, almost always fascinating to listen to. And then I say this channel values, amongst others, these questions. I thought I'd put questions in because I was trying to be succinct. And I thought questions could help me be succinct. Let's hope that they do. Otherwise, this video will go on a while. How can we live life well? That's so important. How can we live it well? It doesn't mean to say that it's always going to be comfortable. It doesn't mean to say that we will be able to sit down and always have a cup of tea and watch the television. doesn't mean that. It means how can we make sure that it is rich and we feel that we're doing something meaningful. We feel that we have purpose. That for me is a big one. And that's important, I think, for certainly me, as I've said, but I think also for an awful lot of people. We're in danger these days of losing touch with our meaning and purpose if we're not careful, because it's so easy to get seduced by the 24/7 online stuff. And then how can we do as much good as possible? Contentious, eh? But I've actually put it there. Yes, I've said it. I've asked that question because I think it's so important. I guess it loops back to leadership, this idea of us, if we want to be, being leaders, because we can lead by thought. There are thought leaders. And of course, we can lead by example. And I believe that it is easy, particularly when we look online and we look at world events, to diminish ourselves and to consider that we make no difference. What can little old me do? My voice doesn't matter, my opinion doesn't matter, and I say that it does. I say that everyone on the planet is unique and everyone has a role to play, should they decide to do so. And by play, I mean to do good, the role to play to do good, because there are a number of people out there who don't care, who are cynical, who are driven by their own selfish ends, and they're likely to always be there. But my belief is that those people are in the minority, much as it may seem otherwise these days. However, the silent majority, to use that phrase, the people who can do good, and of course some who do good, quite a lot of the unsung heroes out there, can think it's just me. You know, there's no point. I don't make a difference. Maybe I'll just give up. And I say to that, no, you do make a difference. None of us ever really understand ultimately. Probably in due course, in a different version of this consciousness, we will understand how much good that we actually do in our lives. And I think it's important that none of us who want to do good and are inherently good ever dial that down, attenuate that capacity and that desire to do good. It is important that we every day, as best we can, do something which is good, or a few things. And then how can we avoid self-sabotage? Well, I've talked about that already when I was mentioning the inner game, this idea of us tripping ourselves up, essentially, of us just not being on the ball. And sometimes that can manifest in the internal dialogue, the negative self-talk. So that's a big one for me, because I get hijacked by that all the time, and I'm sure that you probably do as well, or at least from time to time. That's part of the existence, the experience of it on the planet, I suspect. Some people don't, but, well, they are probably the people we shouldn't put in leadership positions, but that's another story for another time. How can we avoid being sabotaged by others? Yes, I do talk about that, and it's one of the reasons that I've recently made a few videos about psychopaths. I talk about narcissistic leaders as well. And it's important to recognize that because someone is a psychopath, it doesn't mean to say that they're out there planning anything devilish to happen to people, not at all. It means, depending on the type of psychopath, that they may not quite have the same level of empathy and compassion. But that does not mean that they cannot be important members of society and good work colleagues. It doesn't mean that. But some people who have that epithet, psychopath, well, they can do a lot of harm. So we've got to know about them, as we've got to know about certain types of narcissists once more, particularly if they and the psychopath find themselves in positions of influence and have thoughts of, let's say, non-supportive to others' behaviours. I hope that's okay for the algorithm. So then what have we got? We need to create a world which is more compassionate, and everyone has a role to play in that endeavour. I've already touched on that. I've already suggested that we all have a role to play. Each of us, I've sometimes described it this way, each of us can put every day a little brick into the wall that props up our society, and that brick that fortifies it is ethical and it's moral. It's essentially doing good. Again, as I said just the other day, ethical is not the absence of doing bad. It is that in part, but actually ethical behavior, and certainly moral behavior, is about doing good. And I like to think about the need to prop up, to support, like a wall or a flying buttress, the society, the culture, the team, the business that we find ourselves existing within by doing good, by putting another brick in that wall to keep it stable, to keep it safe, to keep children, families, the vulnerable safe. Anyway, that's my thoughts on what the channel is about. I do hope, if you haven't subscribed already, that you do consider it. And if you know of other people who would like to subscribe, please let them know. And the reason for that is partly because to get more of these people on board for these conversations that I'm sure you'll find interesting, whether I like it or not, a few subscribers beyond a certain level allows these people to think, that could be worth my time and my while. And I don't think they're being a prima donna about it or nasty about it. It is literally, well, they have a message very often and they would quite like the audience for that. That makes sense. Not everyone is like that, not everyone cares, but some people that I'm sure you'd like to listen to will decide that, hey, I'm really busy. Oh, look, quite a few people may actually hear what I've got to say, and I want to share what I've got to say. So a lot of that calculation is indeed ethical, because people have also got to look after themselves in terms of time and energy. So there we go. I hope that makes some sort of sense. And if it doesn't, well, there are many other channels. If it does, and you're interested, please subscribe. If you're already subscribed, thank you so very much. It does make a huge difference. And going forward, we will get more and more interactive, I trust. Anyway, I've got to end this here. Hopefully the technical side of it was okay. I'll find out soon. For the moment, from me, bye for now.